Arya Snow didn't realize the stranger blocking the inn's last room was her fated mate until the bond snapped into place. And by then the storm had already made running impossible. The mountain pass through Frostpine had been navigable when she'd begun her ascent that morning. Now, 8 hours later, the sky had transformed into something violent and unforgiving. Bruised purple, streaked with black, heavy with the promise of ice. The wind no longer whispered through the pines. It screamed, carrying the sharp metallic bite of snow that could bury a traveler within hours. The kind of storm that didn't just kill, it erased. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The inn at Frostpine Pass was the only shelter for 30 miles in any direction. A squat, fortress-like structure built from dark stone. It looked less like hospitality and more like survival. Something carved from the mountain's bones by people who understood that warmth was a luxury earned, not given. Arya shoved through the heavy oak door, her fingers stiff and bloodless despite her gloves, and nearly collided with a wall of solid muscle. The wall was a man. He stood with his back to her, every line of his body radiating controlled tension as he spoke to the innkeeper in a voice that reminded her of distant thunder. Low, dangerous, restrained only by choice. "The room is mine," he was saying. "I've already paid." Dark hair fell past the collar of his travel cloak, rain damp and unruly. Even beneath the heavy fabric, Arya could see the breadth of his shoulders, the lethal grace in the way he held himself perfectly still while somehow filling the entire space with coiled energy, like a predator deciding whether or not to strike. "Aye, you paid," the innkeeper replied, unmoved. She was a weathered woman with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen too many storms to be impressed by posturing. But the lady arrived first, and I gave her my word. I don't break it for coin. "I'm not asking you to break it," the stranger said, his tone dropping lower. "I'm asking you to be practical. The storm will kill anyone left outside, I know." The innkeeper's arms crossed. "Which is why I'm not turning either of you away." That's when he turned. Arya's breath caught in her throat. He had the kind of face that made you forget every warning your instincts had ever whispered. Sharp, angular cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, a mouth that suggested he knew exactly how to dismantle a person with words alone, eyes like smoke and steel, gray, piercing, holding far too much intelligence and far too many secrets to be safe. The kind of man who left consequences in his wake. But when those eyes locked onto hers, something shifted. His pupils dilated. His entire body went rigid in a way that reminded her of a wolf catching a scent. Predatory focus sharpening to a single point. And then she felt it. A pull, low in her chest, sharp and insistent, like something buried deep in her blood, recognized him before her mind could process the impossibility. A golden thread snapping taut between them. Humming with energy she'd spent 3 weeks learning to ignore. No. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. He felt it too. The mate bond slamming into place between them like a lightning strike. Undeniable, unwanted, and utterly inescapable. "Don't trust it," her grandmother's voice whispered from memory. "Fate has claws, child. It binds just as easily as it breaks." "There's one room left," the innkeeper was saying, oblivious to the way the air between them had turned electric. "Just the one. Storm will be full force within the hour, and I'll not have deaths on my conscience." She looked between them, shrewd and assessing. So unless you'd rather fight over it, while the cold claims you both, I'd suggest you figure something out. The stranger's gaze hadn't left Arya's face. When he spoke, his voice was rougher, frayed at the edges. We'll share it. I don't think, Arya started. You'd rather freeze to death than spend a night in the same room as me. One dark eyebrow lifted, challenge, and something darker flickering in those steel-gray eyes. We're adults. I'm sure we can manage civility. Civility? As if civility had anything to do with the way her pulse was racing. As if she couldn't feel the bond between them pulling tighter with every breath, urging her closer to a stranger whose name she didn't even know. The innkeeper's expression turned knowing. There's only one bed. Won't be a problem, the stranger said, though his voice suggested otherwise. Any other night, Arya would have walked back into the storm. She'd survived worse in the 3 weeks since the massacre. Since the night fire consumed her pack and left her with nothing but scars and the hunters on her trail. But tonight, the storm howled like a living thing beyond the walls. Tonight, fate wasn't asking. It was demanding. Fine, Arya heard herself say, the word tasting like surrender. We'll share. The room was smaller than Arya had hoped. A single, narrow bed dominated the space, its worn quilt looking thinner than comfort required. A fireplace occupied the far wall, cold and dark. One chair. One window, shuttered against the screaming wind. The walls pressed close, intimate in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. The stranger closed the door behind them, and the click of the latch felt far too final. Name's John, he said quietly, shrugging off his travel cloak. Arya's breath stuttered. Beneath the cloak, he was all controlled power, broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, muscles moving with fluid precision under his dark shirt. But it was the scars that caught her attention. One curved along his forearm, pale and old. Another disappeared beneath his collar, suggesting violence survived rather than avoided. He moved like someone trained for war, but committed to peace. Every gesture measured, every step deliberate. Arya, she managed, forcing her gaze away. The mate bond hummed between them, a living thing she couldn't ignore. She felt his presence like heat against her skin, even across the room. Her instinct screamed at her to move closer, to close the distance, to know. She'd survived 3 weeks by trusting nothing. Not fate, not bonds, certainly not strangers with secrets in their eyes. John crossed to the fireplace, without a word. Kneeling to arrange kindling with practiced hands. He didn't ask permission, didn't wait for instruction, just saw what needed doing and did it. Within minutes, flames crackled to life, casting golden light across the cramped space. You didn't have to do that, Arya said, though warmth was already seeping into her frozen bones. Storm like this, fire isn't optional. John straightened, brushing soot from his hands. His eyes found hers, assessing. When's the last time you ate? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Arya's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to people who noticed, who paid attention to the small things. Trembling hands, hollow cheeks, the way she positioned herself with her back to the wall and eyes on the door. John noticed everything. He produced dried meat and bread from his pack, setting it on the small table between them without comment. An offering, not charity. They ate in silence. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled against the shutters like something alive and furious. Thunder rolled through the mountains, shaking the inn's stone foundations. Where were you headed? John asked eventually, his voice careful. Neutral. South. Long way to travel alone. I prefer it that way. John's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Most people do until they don't. And you, Arya countered. What brings you to Frostpine? Business. He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone suggested he wouldn't. Roads are dangerous this time of year. Everything's dangerous, Arya said quietly. Roads are just honest about it. John's gaze sharpened, and she realized she'd said too much. Revealed too much of the fear threaded through her bones. But he didn't press. Didn't pry. Just nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. The fire crackled, the storm raged, and the bond between them pulled tighter with every shared breath. Night deepened. John took the chair without discussion, angling it toward the door in a way that suggested protection was instinctive. Arya took the bed, fully clothed, her knife hidden beneath the pillow. She didn't expect to sleep, hadn't slept properly in weeks, but exhaustion was a predator that always caught its prey eventually. The fire roared wrong, too hot, too bright, consuming everything. Screams tore through the night, her pack, her family burning. The scent of charred flesh and betrayal, thick in her throat. Hunters laughing as they, Arya! The voice cut through the nightmare like a blade through smoke. You're safe. You're here. Breathe. John's voice, low, steady, anchoring her to the present. Arya gasped awake, heart hammering, sweat cooling on her skin despite the room's warmth. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Only that fire had taken everything and hunters still hunted and... Look at me. She did. John sat forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, close but not touching. His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that left no room for panic. You're at the Frostpine Inn, he said quietly. There's a storm outside. You're safe. I'm here. You don't know that, Arya whispered, her voice raw. You don't know anything. I know you survived something that would have broken most people. John's jaw tightened. I know you're still standing. That's enough. The certainty in his voice steadied something fractured inside her. Slowly, her breathing evened. Her pulse slowed. The nightmare's claws released their grip. I'm fine, she said automatically. You don't have to be. John leaned back, giving her space. Not tonight. Outside, the storm howled its fury. Inside, for the first time in 3 weeks, Arya Snow closed her eyes and believed she might survive until morning. Morning didn't come. Or rather, it came grey and violent, the storm still clawing at the mountains, with no intention of releasing its grip. Through the shuttered window, Arya could hear the wind's relentless shriek, punctuated by the crack of breaking branches and the low rumble of distant avalanches. The innkeeper confirmed it when she brought up bread and hot broth. Pass is completely buried. Won't be clear for at least another day, maybe 2. Her gaze flickered between them, knowing. Best get comfortable. The door closed behind her, leaving Arya and John alone again in the small room that somehow felt even smaller in daylight. John moved to the window, checking the shutters with methodical precision. His presence filled the space the way alpha energy always did, commanding without demanding, powerful without pushing. But Arya noticed something else now, something she'd missed in the chaos of the night before. He restrained it, deliberately, constantly, like holding back a tide that wanted to surge forward. We should eat, John said, turning back to the table. They shared the simple meal in silence at first, the mate bond humming steadily between them. Arya could feel his awareness of her, where she sat, how she moved, the rhythm of her breathing. And worse, she could feel her own awareness of him sharpening with every passing hour. "Your nightmare," John said finally, his voice careful. "It wasn't just a dream." It wasn't a question. Arya's hands stilled around her cup. She should deflect, should lie, should keep the walls firmly in place where they'd protected her for 3 weeks. But something about the storm trapping them, about the way John had grounded her in the dark without asking for anything in return, made the truth feel less dangerous than usual. "My pack was destroyed 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Burned. Everyone I knew, gone in a single night." John's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Not pity, understanding. "Rogues?" he asked. "Hunters." The word tasted like ash. "They weren't interested in challenging us, they just wanted us dead." Arya's jaw tightened. "I survived because I wasn't there. I was out gathering supplies when the attack came. By the time I returned..." She didn't need to finish. John leaned back slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes, just listened with an intensity that made her feel heard in a way she hadn't expected. "They're still hunting me," Arya continued, the words coming easier now. "I don't know why. I'm no one, just a survivor who saw too much." She met his eyes. "That's why I don't trust fate or bonds. The universe already showed me what it thinks I'm worth." "That's not fate," John said, his voice low and edged with something dark. "That's cruelty." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." The certainty in his tone left no room for argument. "And the ones who did this, they'll answer for it." Arya studied him, this stranger who spoke with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making pronouncements and having them become reality. "You sound sure." "I am." "Why?" John was quiet for a long moment, firelight catching in his grey eyes. "Because I'm investigating pack violence across Wolf's Rest. Unauthorized attacks. Coordinated hunters operating outside council law." His jaw tightened. "What happened to your pack? It's not isolated. Someone's orchestrating this." The revelation settled between them, like a stone dropping into still water. "You're not just traveling for business," Arya said slowly. "You're hunting them." "Yes." "Alone?" Something flickered across his face. Resignation. Maybe, or the weight of duty. "I don't have the luxury of choosing my path. My life belongs to obligations I can't walk away from, no matter what I want." The words carried a heaviness that resonated with her. Different circumstances, perhaps, but the same cage. "So we're both running from things we can't escape," Arya murmured. "Maybe." John's gaze held hers. "Or maybe we're both still fighting." The mate bond pulsed stronger, responding to the vulnerability they'd laid bare. Arya felt it in her chest, a pull toward him that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. He understood. He believed her without question. And somehow, that was more intimate than any touch. Hours passed. They talked in fragments, about roads and storms, about survival and loss, about the careful distance both of them kept from the rest of the world. John never dominated the conversation, never pushed, but Arya watched the way he moved through the space, the quiet authority in every gesture, the discipline that kept his power leashed tight. He was dangerous. She knew that. But as the storm continued to rage and the fire burned low, Arya realized something that should have terrified her. She felt safer in this room with John than she had anywhere else since the night fire took everything. and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. By the second evening, the mate bond had become impossible to ignore. It wrapped around Arya like invisible threads, pulling tighter every time John moved, every time he spoke, every time his eyes found hers across the small room. Her body responded in ways her mind refused to accept. Pulse quickening when he came near, skin hyper-aware of the space between them, instincts screaming to close the distance. She hated it. Hated that fate thought it could choose for her. Hated that after everything she'd lost, the universe expected her to trust something as volatile as a bond she'd never asked for. So she fought it. When John offered her more food, she took it without meeting his eyes. When he asked questions, she answered in clipped sentences. When the bond hummed insistently in her chest, urging her closer, she moved to the far side of the room and stayed there. Distance, control, walls firmly in place. John noticed immediately. Of course he did. The man noticed everything. But instead of pushing, instead of demanding acknowledgement of what simmered between them, he simply stepped back, gave her space, moved through the room with careful awareness of where she positioned herself, never crowding, never encroaching, respecting boundaries she hadn't even voiced. Somehow, that made it worse. "You're doing it again," John said from his position by the window. Arya looked up from sharpening her knife, a nervous habit that kept her hands busy. "Doing what?" "Holding your breath when I move." His tone was neutral, but his grey eyes held understanding. "The bond's pulling at you. I can feel it too." "I don't want to talk about it." "I know." John turned back to the shuttered window, checking the gaps where wind whistled through. "We don't have to." The acceptance in his voice disarmed her more than any argument would have. Hours passed in careful silence. The storm had finally begun to ease, though snow still fell in thick curtains outside. John maintained the fire. Arya pretended to read a book the innkeeper had provided, though she couldn't focus on a single word. Then John attempted to shift a log that had rolled from the fireplace, misjudged the heat, and swore sharply as he jerked his hand back. "Brilliant strategy," Arya said before she could stop herself. "Attack the fire with your bare hands. Very tactical." John shot her a look that was equal parts irritation and amusement. "I'll add it to my list of poor decisions today. Must be a long list. Growing longer by the hour." He examined his reddened fingers with a rueful expression. "Any other observations you'd like to share?" Despite everything, the fear, the walls, the resistance pulsing through her, Arya felt her mouth curve into something almost like a smile. "You're surprisingly bad at basic survival for someone who travels alone. And you're surprisingly critical for someone I saved from freezing. You didn't save me. We made a practical arrangement. Keep telling yourself that." The moment hung between them, lighter than anything that had come before. Something loosened in Arya's chest, just slightly, just enough to remember what it felt like to laugh without waiting for the next disaster. Later, as twilight painted the room in shades of blue and gold, John stood by the window again, his posture shifting into something more focused. "Come here," he said quietly. Arya's instincts bristled. "Why?" "Because I'm going to teach you something useful." He glanced back at her. "Unless you'd rather keep sitting there pretending to read the same page for the third hour." She shouldn't go to him. Shouldn't close the distance. But curiosity won over caution. John gestured to the window. "Tell me what you sense." "The storm's clearing." "Beyond that, deeper." His voice dropped lower, taking on an instructive tone. "You're wolf-blooded. You can feel things others miss. Danger has a signature, a weight in the air before it arrives. Close your eyes. Arya hesitated, then obeyed. Breathe, John murmured beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Let your instincts speak louder than your thoughts. What do you feel? At first, nothing. Then, a disturbance, faint but growing, like pressure building before a storm, wrongness creeping at the edges of awareness. Her eyes snapped open. Something's out there. John's expression had gone cold and hard. He was already moving to gather his weapons, his entire demeanor shifting from companion to warrior in a heartbeat. John? He pulled back the shutter just enough to look out, his jaw tightening at whatever he saw. Tracks in the fresh snow, multiple sets converging on the inn. They're here, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. The hunters, and they're not here by accident. John's hand remained on the shutter, his body gone utterly still. In that predatory way Arya had learned meant he was calculating threats and probabilities at lightning speed. How many? She asked, already reaching for her pack. 6. Maybe 7. His voice was clipped, efficient. They're spreading out to cover all exits. Professional formation. Arya's blood turned to ice. Let me see. John shifted just enough for her to peer through the gap. The tracks were fresh, cutting through pristine snow in deliberate patterns. But it was the sigil one of the figures wore, barely visible in the fading light, that made her stomach drop. A broken crown beneath a wolf's skull. Rogue Council, John said, confirming her worst fear. Faction that's been operating outside official authority for months. His jaw tightened. They're the ones coordinating the pack attacks. They found me. Arya's hands trembled as she fastened her weapons belt. I knew it was only a matter of time, but... How long have they been hunting you specifically? Since the massacre. I'm the only witness to what they did. She met his eyes, forcing herself to remain steady. They can't afford to let me testify to what I saw. John turned to face her fully. And something in his expression had shifted, gone from careful neutrality to fierce protectiveness, so absolute it stole her breath. They won't touch you, he said with quiet certainty. You don't know that. You don't even know me. I know enough. He moved closer, not touching but near enough that the mate bond flared between them like wildfire. And I know I'm not letting anyone harm you. Not tonight. Not ever. The possessiveness in his tone should have rankled, should have made her push back against the assumption that she needed protecting. Instead, it made something inside her want to trust him completely. I can fight, Arya said, forcing steel into her voice. I've survived 3 weeks alone. I don't need... I know you can fight. That's not the point. John's grey eyes held hers with intensity that made it hard to breathe. But you don't have to fight alone anymore. The bond surged, responding to the promise in his words. Her instincts screamed at her to accept his protection, to lean into the strength he was offering. She couldn't. Wouldn't. Relying on someone else meant risking loss all over again. We need to prepare, she said instead, stepping back. What's the plan? John studied her for a moment longer, something like understanding flickering across his face. Then he nodded and shifted into tactical mode. They'll wait until full dark to attack. Gives us maybe an hour. He assessed the room with practiced efficiency. 1 door, 1 window. We'll barricade the door, control the approach. If they breach, we fight. Arya was already moving furniture. They expect me to run, They won't expect resistance. They worked in synchronized silence, their movements complementing each other with an ease that spoke to the bond humming between them. John positioned the heavy bed against the door, while Arya reinforced the window shutters. He handed her weapons without being asked. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them. It should have felt awkward, this forced intimacy of preparing for battle in close quarters. Instead, it felt natural. Right. When John reached past her to secure a shutter, his arm brushed hers, just the barest contact, but it sent electricity racing through her veins. The bond responded immediately, flaring hot and insistent, urging them closer, even as danger circled outside. Their eyes met, neither moving away. "Arya," John said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "After this is over." "Don't." She shook her head. "Don't make promises about after when we don't know if there will be one." His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not quite touching. "Then I'll make you a different promise. Whatever happens tonight, you survive. Even if—" "No." Her hand caught his wrist, stopping him. "We both survive. Or neither of us does." John's eyes widened slightly, something like wonder crossing his features. "That's not—" "I don't need your noble sacrifice," Arya interrupted. "I need your sword arm and your strategic mind. So stop planning your dramatic last stand and focus." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." The moment stretched between them, intimate despite, or perhaps because of, the violence waiting outside. The bond thrummed louder, feeding off their proximity, their shared danger, the unspoken understanding forming between them. Then footsteps crunched in the snow outside. John's entire body shifted, power coiling beneath controlled stillness. His hand moved to his sword, and Arya felt the air itself change. Pressure building, alpha dominance rising to the surface he'd kept so carefully leashed. Through the gaps in the shutters, she could see shadows converging. The hunters had surrounded the inn, and they were done waiting. The attack came with brutal efficiency. The door splintered inward despite the barricade, wood exploding in a shower of fragments as 3 hunters forced their way through. Another crashed through the window, glass and timber raining down. Arya moved on instinct, her blade finding flesh before conscious thought caught up. The hunter staggered back with a curse, blood blooming across his shoulder. But it was John who became something else entirely. He moved like violence given form, precise, lethal, every strike calculated to end threats with minimum wasted motion. His sword sang through the air, meeting steel with force that drove his opponents backward. No hesitation, no mercy. Just brutal, controlled efficiency that spoke of decades of training and countless battles survived. A hunter lunged at Arya from the side. John was there before she could react, his blade intercepting the attack with a clash that reverberated through the small room. He shoved the man back with enough force to send him crashing into the wall, then spun to face 2 more closing in. "Stay behind me," John ordered, his voice carrying a weight of command that made even Arya's instincts want to obey. "Not a chance," she shot back, engaging another hunter who'd circled toward the window. The fight intensified. Steel rang against steel. Bodies moved in deadly choreography. Blood slicked the floor. And then something changed. Arya felt it first as a hum in her chest. The mate bond suddenly surging with power she didn't understand. Energy poured through her, hot and electric, flowing outward toward John like a dam breaking. John's entire presence expanded. The air itself seemed to bend around him, pressure building until Arya's ears popped. His movements became faster, stronger, each strike carrying devastating force. When he spoke, his voice resonated with alpha dominance, so absolute it made her bones vibrate. Enough! The single word cracked through the room like a whip. The hunters faltered, their bodies betraying them as instinct recognized something their minds hadn't yet processed. Even Arya felt the pull, the primal urge to submit, to kneel, to acknowledge the sheer dominance radiating from Jon in waves. But she stood her ground, watching in stunned realization as Jon became something far beyond a skilled fighter. He became a force of nature. One hunter tried to press the attack. Jon caught his sword arm, twisted with surgical precision, and sent the man sprawling with his weapon clattering across the floor. Another attempted to flank him. Jon moved with impossible speed, his blade finding the hunter's shoulder in a non-lethal but incapacitating strike. The remaining attackers scrambled backward, finally recognizing that they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Jon advanced on them slowly, his grey eyes gone cold as winter steel. The alpha dominance rolled off him in crushing waves, making even Arya's breath catch despite the bond protecting her from the worst of it. "Tell your masters," Jon said, his voice carrying lethal promise, "that hunting innocence in my realm ends now." One hunter's face went sheet white. "Your realm?" His eyes widened in horror as recognition finally dawned. "Leave," Jon commanded, and the word carried such absolute authority that the hunters moved before conscious thought could intervene. They fled, scrambling through broken doors and windows, abandoning weapons and wounded pride in their desperation to escape. Within seconds, the sound of horses thundering away echoed through the mountain pass. Silence fell like a held breath. Jon stood in the center of the destroyed room, chest heaving, sword still raised. The alpha dominance slowly receded, pulled back under iron control, but Arya could still feel it hovering beneath the surface, vast and terrible and deliberately restrained. She stared at him, her mind racing to connect pieces that suddenly formed a picture she should have seen earlier. The way he carried himself, the authority in every word, the disciplined restraint over power that should have been impossible to contain. The hunter's recognition and terror. "Jon," she said slowly, her voice steadier than she felt. "What did he mean, your realm?" Jon turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like regret in his eyes. "Arya, no." She shook her head, pieces clicking into place with awful clarity. "Don't deflect. Don't redirect. Who are you really?" The mate bond hummed between them, but now it carried a different weight, the weight of truth about to shatter everything she thought she understood. Jon's jaw tightened. He lowered his sword slowly, but his eyes never left hers. "I told you I was investigating pack violence," he said quietly. "That was true. What I didn't tell you was who gave me the authority to do so." Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who?" Jon's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of inevitability. "Myself," he said, "because I'm not just Jon. I'm Jon Stark, Alpha King of Wolf's Rest." The words hung in the air between them, and Arya's world tilted on its axis. The silence stretched like a blade drawn across skin. Arya stared at Jon. No, at Jon Stark, Alpha King of Wolf's Rest, and felt the foundation of the past 2 days crumble beneath her feet. "You're lying," she said, though she knew he wasn't. "I'm not." Jon's voice remained steady, but something in his eyes looked almost pained. "I'm the Alpha King. I have been for 7 years. Arya's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "The Alpha King? the most powerful wolf in the realm, and you just happened to be arguing over a room at a mountain inn during a storm. I travel without escort when I need to investigate personally, when I need to see things as they truly are, not filtered through advisors and reports. John took a careful step toward her. Everything I told you was true, Arya. I am investigating the pack attacks. The Rogue Council is real. Your testimony matters. What else was true? Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. The concern, the protection, or was that just the Alpha King securing a valuable witness? John's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair? The word tasted like acid. You let me trust you. You listened to me talk about my destroyed pack, about being hunted, about how fate took everything from me. And the entire time you knew. You knew who you were, what you were, and you said nothing. I know. You let me believe you were just someone. Arya's hands shook with anger, and something worse, hurt that cut deeper than it should. Someone I could talk to. Someone who might actually understand what it means to have no power over your own life. I do understand that, John said quietly, and something in his voice made her pause. More than you know. How could you possibly? Because I've never been able to choose anything that mattered. The words came out raw, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained. Not my path, not my duty, not even whether I wanted the crown in the first place. Every decision I make affects thousands of lives. Every choice is weighed against the realm's needs, not my own. The mate bond pulsed between them, responding to his pain despite Arya's fury. She hated that she could feel it. Hated that even now, even angry and betrayed, some part of her wanted to close the distance and... No. That doesn't excuse lying to me, Arya said, forcing steel back into her voice. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. John ran a hand through his hair, frustration finally breaking through his composure. Because I wanted... He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. I wanted you to know me, not the crown, not the title, not the Alpha King that everyone fears or uses or manipulates, just me. There is no just you, Arya shot back. You are the Alpha King. That's not something you can take off like a cloak when it's convenient. I know that. John's voice dropped lower. But for 2 days, I got to be someone else. Someone you looked at without fear or calculation. Someone you trusted because of who I was, not what I could do for you. The honesty in his words should have softened her anger. Instead, it made everything worse. You didn't give me a choice, Arya said, her voice breaking slightly. You felt the bond snap into place just like I did. You knew what it meant. And you still hid the truth from me because you wanted... She shook her head. What? To see if I'd choose you without knowing. To test whether I was worthy of the great Alpha King. No. John moved closer, stopping when she flinched back. Because I've spent my entire life watching people choose the crown over the man. Watching them see only what I can give them. Never who I am beneath it all. His gray eyes held hers with desperate intensity. And when you looked at me, Arya, when you let me help you, when you laughed, when you trusted me with your nightmares, you saw me, just me, and I couldn't bear to lose that. The mate bond surged, responding to his vulnerability, to the truth bleeding through every word. Arya felt it pulling at her, urging forgiveness, demanding she acknowledge that his pain was real, even if his choices were wrong. She fought it with everything she had. I need air, she said, moving toward the shattered door. Arya, don't. She held up a hand, not looking back. Just don't. I can't. Her throat tightened. I need to think. Away from you. Away from this. Away from the bond that made it impossible to separate her own feelings from what fate insisted she should feel. John didn't follow, didn't argue, just stood in the wreckage of the room they'd defended together, watching her walk away. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Arya paused in the doorway, but didn't turn around. So am I, she whispered. Then she stepped out into the cold night air, leaving the Alpha King alone with the truth neither of them had wanted. Arya made it exactly 50 feet from the inn before they came for her. The attack was surgical, silent figures materializing from the tree line, cutting off her retreat before she could even draw her blade. More hunters than before, better armed, coordinated. And leading them was a man whose sigil marked him as Rogue Council Elite. Arya Snow, he said, his voice carrying the cultured menace of someone accustomed to power. You've led us on quite a chase, but it ends tonight. Arya's hand went to her knife. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. He gestured and 6 hunters closed in around her. The Alpha King may have interfered earlier, but he's not here now. And you, his smile was cruel. You're just one survivor who knows too much, Steele whispered as weapons were drawn. Arya tensed, calculating odds that looked increasingly grim. Then a voice cut through the night like a blade through silk. She's not alone. John stepped from the inn's doorway, and this time he didn't bother restraining what he was. Alpha dominance rolled off him in crushing waves, making the air itself feel heavier. His eyes had gone cold and predatory, and when he moved, it was with the lethal grace of something apex. The Rogue Council leader's expression shifted to shock, then calculation. Your Majesty, this doesn't concern you. The girl is under my protection. John's voice carried absolute authority, as are all survivors of the massacres your faction orchestrated. You can't prove we had anything to do. I don't need to prove it here. John descended the inn steps slowly, each movement deliberate. I'll prove it in front of the full council, with every witness I've gathered over the past 3 months, including her. He glanced at Arya. Unless you'd prefer to compound treason with regicide. The threat hung heavy in the frozen air. The rogue leader's jaw tightened. You're one man, Your Majesty. Powerful, yes. But even you can't fight all of us and protect her simultaneously. Can't I? John's hand moved to his sword, and Arya felt the mate bond suddenly surge, not pulling at her this time, but waiting. Offering, asking a question she hadn't understood before. She remembered the fight in the inn, the way her presence had amplified his power without her conscious choice, the way the bond had flowed between them, strengthening him in ways that defied explanation. Mates didn't just complement each other, they enhanced each other, multiplied each other's strength when they chose to connect. John was offering her the choice he'd stolen before, the choice to stand with him or walk away, to trust him or protect herself. The rogue leader raised his hand, signaling the attack. Arya made her decision. She didn't move toward John, didn't physically close the distance. She simply opened herself to the bond, consciously, deliberately, letting the connection between them flare to full strength. Power surged through her like lightning through a conduit, then poured outward toward John in a torrent of raw energy. John's eyes flashed, his entire presence expanding, as the bond completed a circuit neither of them had fully activated before. The alpha dominance that had been crushing became overwhelming, bending reality itself under its weight. When he moved, it was too fast for normal eyes to track. He struck the first hunter with controlled force, disarming, disabling, but not killing. The second met his blade and was thrown backward by sheer kinetic power. The third tried to flank him and found himself on his knees, unable to even raise his weapon against the dominance saturating the air. Arya felt it all through the bond, felt Jon's control, even amid violence, his restraint, even while protecting. He could have killed them all. The power flowing through him was more than sufficient. He chose mercy instead. Within minutes, the hunters were disarmed and subdued. Only the rogue leader remained standing, his face ashen with the realization of how badly he'd miscalculated. "Tell your council," Jon said, his voice resonating with alpha command that couldn't be disobeyed, "that I'm coming. With evidence, with witnesses, and with my mate." His eyes found Arya's across the bloodless battlefield. "And if they're wise, they'll surrender before I arrive." The rogue leader fled, his remaining hunters scrambling after him. Silence fell. Jon's power slowly receded, pulled back under control. But the bond between them remained open, humming with connection Arya had chosen to accept. He turned to her, slowly. "Arya." "I'm still angry," she interrupted, walking toward him. "You should have told me. You should have given me the choice from the beginning. I know. But I understand why you didn't." She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat of him despite the winter cold. "And I'm choosing now, not because fate demands it, not because you're the Alpha King." Her eyes held his. "Because you saw me when I needed to be seen, because you protected me without demanding anything in return, because the man matters more than the crown." Jon's breath caught. "You don't have to." "I'm not standing beneath you," Arya said firmly. "I'm standing beside you, as your mate, as your equal, on my terms." Something like wonder crossed Jon's face. "On your terms," he agreed quietly. The bond settled between them, not forced, not desperate, but chosen, accepted, claimed. "So what now?" Arya asked. Jon's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "Now, we ride south, together, and I dismantle the council that tried to destroy you." "Together," Arya echoed. And for the first time since fire took her past, she believed the future might be worth choosing. 3 weeks later, Arya stood in the great hall of Winterspire Castle and watched justice finally arrive. The rogue council members knelt in chains before the Alpha King's throne, not because Jon's dominance forced them, but because the evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from a dozen survivors, financial records tracing payments to the hunters, correspondence proving they'd orchestrated the massacres to consolidate power and eliminate opposition. Arya's testimony had been the final piece that shattered their defense. She'd spoken clearly, without fear, recounting the night fire consumed her pack and the weeks she'd spent running. Jon had stood beside her throughout, silent support that never overshadowed her voice. The council's verdict was unanimous: treason, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of authority. Sentences were passed. The rogue faction was dismantled, its members stripped of rank and exiled beyond Wolf's Rest's borders. It was over. As the hall emptied and evening shadows stretched across ancient stone, Arya found Jon on the castle's eastern balcony, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "You're thinking too loud," she said, stepping beside him. Jon's mouth curved slightly. "Occupational hazard. Want to share?" He was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her fully. The council has been pushing me to formalize things. The mate bond, your position here." His grey eyes searched hers. "They expect me to name you queen." Arya's stomach tightened. "And what do you want?" "I want you to choose." John's voice was steady, certain. "Not because protocol demands it. Not because the bond exists. Not because I'm king and you feel obligated." He took her hand, the touch sending familiar warmth through the bond between them. "I want you to choose this life, if it's what you truly want." "What if I don't want to be queen?" Arya asked quietly. "Then you won't be." John's certainty never wavered. "You can be my mate, my partner, my equal, and nothing more. You can advise me, challenge me, stand beside me in whatever capacity feels right to you, but I won't cage you with a crown you never asked for." The words settled something deep in Arya's chest. He understood. After everything, he still saw her as more than just what she could become for him. "I spent 3 weeks believing I'd lost everything," Arya said slowly. "My pack, my home, my future. I was running toward nothing because there was nothing left to run toward." John's hand tightened on hers. But then a stranger offered to share a room during a storm. She smiled slightly. And somewhere between the fighting and the hiding and the truth neither of us wanted to face, I realized something. "What?" "That home isn't a place. It's not a pack or a title, or even a bond fate decided for us." Arya moved closer, until she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "It's choosing someone who sees you completely, crown and all, scars and all, and choosing them anyway." John's breath caught. "Arya." "So yes," she interrupted. "I choose this. I choose you. Not as queen, not yet, maybe not ever, but as your mate, your partner. Your equal who'll stand beside you and challenge you and probably drive you insane." "I'm counting on it," John murmured, his forehead coming to rest against hers. The mate bond flared between them, but this time it didn't pull or demand. It simply settled, complete, claimed, theirs. When John kissed her, it was soft and deliberate, a promise more than passion, a beginning rather than an ending. Later, they found themselves in John's private chambers, firelight casting familiar shadows. A single room, a single bed. The echo of that first night, but transformed by everything they'd survived to reach this moment. "No storm tonight," Arya observed, settling against his side. "No hunters either," John added, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. "Just us." "Just us," he agreed. Arya closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of John's heartbeat, the warmth of the bond connecting them, the weight of a future she'd chosen freely. She'd once shared a room with a stranger to escape a storm. Now she shared a future with a king who knelt only for her, not because fate demanded it, but because love asked nothing and offered everything. And for the first time since fire tried to steal her story, Arya Snow understood that some endings were really beginnings in disguise. The moon hadn't chosen them. They'd chosen each other. And that made all the difference. The end. If this story stirred something in you, your voice matters. Subscribe for more tales of forbidden love, alpha kings, and destinies forged in fire and choice, because the best stories are the ones we choose together.